Anyone here fly fish? Yeah, no? good on you. The Sage fishing rod I want is worth about $1,000. I don't need one, I want one. I've got a $200 kill wheel rod that my wife thinks is perfectly adequate for the amount of times I get out to go fishing. But you see, I want a Sage rod because it's what a Sage rod does for me when I stand on the riverbank. My fishing buddies know I've arrived because a Sage rod is absolutely top of the line. And of course, the intellectual justification, I can tell my wife I'm going to catch a heck of a lot more fish. All right? So I'm not saying the intellectual justification is important, but most of the decision-making, purchase decision-making is emotional. And I'm going to prove to you why that's the case. Our brains think in two ways. Forget about left-right brain, that's not very helpful. Has anyone here heard of heuristics before? Yeah. Our brains work in two ways. First is intellectual thought, consciousness. You know, when you hear the voices in the head, that's intellectual thought. That's the little discussion that goes on in your head. Heuristics is the other area of the brain where all of our memory resides. Now, we don't have conscious access into that area, and therefore we've discounted that as being all that significant in decision making, because what we think is, well, the intellectual side of the brain is the one doing the work here. But you know what I said about the market research surveys, how they say one thing and we do another? That's starting to be a clue as to what's really going on. What we're now finding is that most of decision making occurs in heuristic memory, out of heuristic memory. They are pre-packaged ideas that reside in our brain, and I'm going to explain to you why and how that works. It's really about emotional attachment. Where there's low emotional attachment, you're going to be struggling to charge higher prices for your product. Where there's high emotional attachment, like my Sage fishing rod, they can whip $1,000 out of my pocket when a normal rod costs about $200 or $300. All right? You see, I don't need a Sage fishing rod, I want one. So what we now know is that this emotional side, the heuristic side of our brain, is doing most of the thinking for us, and that's a bit scary because we don't seem to have access down there. What we do know is customers make their decisions based on only two things: good feelings and solutions to problems. Okay? Can you see the relationship again between intellectual thought and emotional influence there? Good feelings, solutions to problems. Customers are value conscious, not price conscious. Price is about wants as well. I'm reading a book at the moment called Priceless. It's worth reading. It explains a lot about how flexible pricing really is. So if you think that pricing is fixed, and of course the economists love having a debate about this, the science of economy, but it's all based on what we think. Again, you know, we're talking about this recession. What's it about? It's about what we think. It's not what's actually going on. It's about what we think. If we think times are bad, they're bad. If we think times are good, they're good. So it's all up to us and how we think about things. So customers are value conscious, not price conscious, which means that they're looking for value. And remember what I said earlier on? Businesses hide their value. So we're in trouble already. We've got to learn how to lift the value of what it is that we are selling. How do we make it more evident? How do we become more transparent? And of course, the other thing about value is it's totally perceptual. What you call value and what I call value can be two entirely different things. Hands up those people here that would pay $1,000 for a Sage fishing rod. Good man, got a mate. So most people wouldn't, because it's of no value to you. I mean, unless you go fishing, it's of no value. All right? So value is not a sort of set concept or idea that we all agree on. You only got to have a look at the housing market to understand that. All right? So businesses have got to start learning that value is in the minds of the customer, and you've got to understand who values what. Isn't it funny that you go into a supermarket and all the prices are all the same? Doesn't matter whether you're a prince or a pauper, the money's the same. You pay the same. That actually is a nonsense. And some businesses are starting to figure it out. Okay. Now, what we also know is that thinking is not a preferred option. Humans do not like to think, believe it or not. We think we are really smart, but the reality is we prefer not to think. Has anyone seen this lady? She was actually out at Petone a wee while ago, yeah. And this bike is a rather remarkable bike. This woman makes a heck of a lot of money. She puts a couple of cones down on the ground, though, usually about 40 or 50 feet apart. And you pay her $1. And if you can ride her bike between the two cones on the ground, she'll give you $5. Now, this woman makes a lot of money. And you can see from the crowds around, and it's usually sort of testosterone-saturated males with their girlfriends there that have a point to prove that take up the challenge, okay? They get on that bike of hers, and they only get about sort of 3 feet, and they fall flat on their faces. And the reason is that she's been very clever. You can see up here there's a gearing system in the bike. What happens is when you turn the handlebars one way, the wheel goes the opposite way. Okay? So people don't get on too well riding a bike. But the interesting thing I loved watching was what happens when the guy falls flat on his face. Because now he's embarrassed. All the people are watching, including his girlfriend. So he goes back and pays another $1 to prove that he's not an idiot, that he can ride a bike. And he gets back there, and the next thing he does is absolutely fascinating. He stands on the bike, straddling the bike, thinking, because he knows there's a trick to this. And that's a nonsense, because we don't ride bikes intellectually. That's the worst thing you can do is think about it. But that's what they do. So you see, thinking is not a preferred option. We master riding a bike, and then we defer that skill down into the heuristic part of our brain, which is why heuristics, most of what we do in our everyday life comes out of heuristics. Imagine if we had to get up in the morning, every morning, and learn how to walk again like a baby. You see, it's learned. We learn everything. And as much as we can possibly learn, including how to shop, by the way, goes down into heuristic memory. So most of the time, we're on autopilot. I don't know about you folk who came in this morning, if you're like me, pretty bleary-eyed, got up too early, drove in. The number of times we've done that, can't remember a damn thing about the journey. You've been thinking about the weekend or something like that. Now, who's driving the car, guys? If you weren't driving the car, you can't remember who was driving the car. Well, what happens is the heuristic side of the brain says, Dave, I've driven this car 1,000 times before, I know this route. If anything goes wrong, I'll let you know. Otherwise, I will drive the car and you can think about the presentation, think about next weekend, whatever. So we can do some amazingly complex things on autopilot. You know, how many people here have got down the road in the morning and thought, my God, did I lock the front door? It's pointless asking the conscious intellectual mind whether you locked the door, because it didn't. It never does. It's locked by the heuristic side of the brain on autopilot. So don't go searching for the questions down there, because there's no answer coming back, all right? It can't speak to you. It can actually speak to us in a different way. So as much as 80% of everything we do is automated. So there's the answer to the market research questionnaires, why we get it so wrong. Now, the other interesting thing is that we run on drugs. Every feeling that we have is drug-induced. The body has its own pharmacy. Good feelings and bad, they're just drugs. They're just drugs that our brain produces to warn us, get us sort of cautious, or to make us feel good about things that we're doing. Okay? Every feeling we have is drug-induced. And this is the way our heuristic mind talks to our intellectual mind. This is actually a ride called the Oblivion in the UK. And it's a pretty simple idea. Basically, everyone gets in that carriage, gets cranked up 10 floors, and then they're dropped vertically into a hole in the ground. And the whole thing only takes a matter of seconds. And apparently it's a pretty, I haven't been on it, it's a pretty frightening trip. The makers of the ride, when they built this thing, they took blood tests from people at the top of the ride and at the end of the ride, and the adrenaline levels were about 3 times when the ride was over. Now, adrenaline is a really fascinating drug because it does a lot of interesting things. It makes your heart pump like crazy. It makes blood go out to the extremities. It causes you to stop digesting food. And so what's that about? It's the old primitive brain, the primitive body, getting ready for the fight or flight. So has anyone here read Blink, Malcolm Gladwell's Blink? He talks a wee bit about this stuff. So what